Welcome to When We Die Talks. I'm your host, Zach Ansell. In this podcast, we explore different beliefs about what happens when we die and how those ideas shape the way we live. Thanks for tuning in. I'm glad you're here. This episode is brought to you by The Dead Book. Okay, let's get real for a second. How prepared are your parents, your siblings, your partner, or even you for the future? We're not talking about the fun stuff, but the hard stuff, end-of-life planning. It's a tough conversation, but that's why The Dead Book exists. The Dead Book makes it easy to plan ahead, even if you think you don't have the time, money, or assets. It's affordable, straightforward, and designed to give you and your loved ones peace of mind. They've made it their mission to help others avoid the chaos and stress that comes with being unprepared. Visit thedeadbook.co and get started today. And just for listening, use the code WWDT at checkout for 15% off. In this episode, I'm joined by Derek Green, a longtime friend whose journey through loss and self-discovery offers a candid look at our relationship with mortality. Derek and many members of his family have a rare genetic neurological disorder called Huntington's disease, which has deeply influenced his understanding of life and death. We discuss how this diagnosis has shaped his perspective, along with his exploration of fear, acceptance, and spirituality. Derek shares how diving into different belief systems has helped him find meaning and a greater appreciation for the present moment. His story is one of resilience, introspection, and coming to terms with life's impermanence. This conversation isn't just about coming to terms with death, it's about the choices we make in response to it. It's a reflection on how facing the end can spark a deeper appreciation for the life we have right now. I hope you enjoy. Hey man, good to see you. Thanks for coming in. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Zach. It's been a pleasure to get invited to the show.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you. When I released this project almost a year ago now, you were just like super supportive right out of the gate, which I loved. Thank you so much for that.
Of course.
We've known each other for almost a decade now, working in the photo industry together. But yeah, once we started talking about death, we really kind of connected and had some good conversations around it. So I'm excited to have you in and chat a little bit.
I'm excited to be here, and it's been really easy to support you in this.
Thank you.
We'll talk about as we go. Death has always been something that's been very close to my heart. We've been able to generate a lot of creative experiences between the two of us. And so I was like, oh yeah, this is something if you want to do this, how can I help you out?
Yeah. Well, thank you. From our conversations, I think this is going to be a great episode. Learn some stuff about you that I had no idea. Yeah. So I'll be super excited. You ready to do it?
Yeah, let's go.
What is your relationship with death?
Oh man. Okay. So we usually like to talk about this you're going to have to forgive me a little bit. I'm ADHD, so
go where you need
branches.
To go.
There's branches, but it's all in the same tree. So in my family, there's this genetic disease called Huntington's disease. It's a neurological disorder that is almost like Alzheimer's, ALS, and Parkinson's all rolled in one. And so it's something that has been in my family for generations. And my mom actually had it. And so she passed away when I was 20 and she was 47. She had 8 siblings and half of them passed to this disease.
Wow. So
it's been something that's something I've experienced a lot, death. And so to me, it's always been a part of life. And I always recognize that other people fear it a lot. And I was always be like, I just don't see that. It's like very much. And the cool thing about having a huge Irish Catholic family is, whether or not it's supposed to get talked about, it gets talked about.
Yeah.
You know how families are.
Yeah, totally.
And so to me, as a kid, I was like, the first time you see like your grandma's, passed away. Oh man, she passed away on Christmas Eve. That was a tough one. And, you're like, oh man, this sucks. But before she passed away, it was like the first Christmas in a long time. She was able to buy the whole family Christmas gifts. Right. And so there are things that the person leaves behind that get put into the universe that is now completely out of their hands. And that momentum generates and it moves and it creates all of these other ripples. Right. And so I've always been able to kind of recognize that and be like, oh man, that's really beautiful. That's really dope. It wasn't until like my mom got sick that I really was like, oh man, what does all this mean? Like I said, I'm Irish Catholic raised. And so, my mom's very devout. And for the most part, I was pretty devout. It's all, as a teenager, it all seems a little like, what
it's a tricky
this?
age.
Yeah. But once I got there, Once I got out of high school and into college, and my mom was actually getting to that point where she was going to pass, I got really into all the religions. I just wanted to check them out. I'm a literature nerd, and I love to read, and I love to and history, and I love to experience those ancient, all the other cultures of the world. And so I started reading just about everything. I started with Buddhism because it's it's, I don't want to say hip, but it is.
It also feels like, at least from my experience, like one of the easier ones to like approach.
Yes. Yeah. It's more focused on self and meditation and like this betterment and like reaching a state of nirvana, right? Where the suffering of the world doesn't touch you anymore.
Yeah.
That's super cool. And so I was like, all right, I like this, the Four Noble Truths. And so I started getting into other Eastern philosophies, Confucianism, Taoism, Hinduism. I've read the Bhagavad Gita, which is super beautiful. And then I started to get into these religions just kind of as literatures and like their major texts as like these really beautiful poetic things. And I've read the Bible all the way through twice, once for school and once for myself.
Probably got a lot of different experiences out of the two.
Yeah. And, it's interesting to have something where when you really can look at them and you're like, wow, the Bible is like a text about these people. It's their history, right? And it's the Jews in this area, and they do some pretty terrible shit to a lot of other people around them, and they're kind of conquerors. And, you're like, oh, but that's just the way of the world. And then I started to be able to connect this stuff I was reading in my literature classes and history classes and learning like, oh yeah, man, if they were in the, this crescent, the Fertile Crescent, these three rivers flood, of course it feels like it's the whole world that flooded. And of course they're like, we barely survived and yada, yada, yada. And it creates these stories. And because there was also a lot of other stories from those areas that were parallel, the flood and
across all the religions.
Yeah. And so I was like, to me, the wider those stories connected, the more legitimate they felt. And so my faith in those sort of things only got stronger. I was like, I believe. It's not me being my agnosticism or what at the time when I was in college, I was like, I'm not sure. But, it was like, I believe there's something.
Yeah.
And as I started to read this, my mom finally did pass. And so my mom had been sick, right? And so with Huntington's, there is a very long degeneration. And so when my mom did finally pass, it wasn't sad. Like there's the sadness of missing your mom, right? But it was the release of watching her suffering end.
Yeah.
And so these religions and these things that I'm reading about are really connecting because I'm like, oh yeah, because this is how I feel. My mom was only ever like, she would show us love, right? And me and my brother were like, my mom just showed us love.
Yeah.
And that's what she taught me, how to respect women. She taught me how to love everyone. And that's how me and my brother approach the world. I don't carry anything, well, obviously life. So there's a lot of things that happen, but at her passing, I just felt this love.
Yeah.
And so me and Sam would really just go around and carrying this love. And I've noticed, obviously, that's how she continues to be in my life.
Yeah.
Is I see how that connection happens and it reaches, and this is how I can have a connection with you.
Yeah.
And be like, oh, you want to talk about death? I want to support you. I want to show you this caring and this ability to like, hey, yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
This is a good thing. These people matter to us. It doesn't matter that their impact is more or less than the president's.
Yeah.
It's just that it's the most important to you.
Yeah.
And how do you interact because of their influence all the time? That's who they are.
Yeah.
And so, as I got through college and felt pretty good about all this stuff, I started feeling certain things and all this kind of stuff. And I'm the type to be, it's genetic. Like I said, the Huntington's disease, I'm the type to check. And so I got tested and I got a positive test result. And so in some ways it felt like I had done it to myself because you're just, when you worry, right? You're like, I'm going to worry about this. This totally, I felt like I was destined to have this. I mean, I did. I felt like I was destined to have it. I had this moment of synchronization in high school where I was just like, I think I have this shit. Anyways, so I get this diagnosis and it doesn't really hit for at least a week. But once it kind of like sunk in, I had to take some time off from work, had to do all this stuff because it sucked. It was terrible.
It's heavy. It's as heavy as it can get.
As heavy as it can get. But because I was raised by my mom, single parent, but she wasn't really able to be there, right? And so in a lot of ways, I raised myself. Yeah. And so when you're that kind of a person, you can't help but be like, I have to do what I have to do. And so I was like, well, I'm not going to stay in fucking Montana. So I moved out here to Portland. For the most part, I've always been very private. And so that's like when we first talked about this, you were like, I never even knew this. This is crazy.
Yeah.
And it's not something I'd necessarily tell people.
Which is understandable.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, no, I mean, like, yeah, I do. But it's like the way, especially in my 20s, I was like, it's okay. Like, it's not really going to affect me that much. But once I moved out here, I was like, I'm going to like be an artist. I'm going to try to get as much, do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to write. Like, I'm not going to just, fuck the man. I'm not doing any of it. And, for the most part, over the past 11 years since I've moved here, I've done a lot of that stuff. I've also worked in a lot of industry. I still work in the food industry. I still do all that stuff.
You're doing it all.
I'm doing it all.
Yeah. And
so, that part of it has felt good, but it also like galvanized me into having health, like being a freak about my health. I work out all the time. I changed my diet to being a vegetarian. I started sleeping. I wouldn't go out as much. I started just treating myself way better than, I still have fun. Yeah. Don't get me wrong, but
still.
Because you're in your 20s. You're not going to not have
You got to
fun.
live.
Yeah. Got to live. But I was also like, all right, but I'll still work out. Like, still go do this. And, the cool part has been that physically speaking, great. But emotionally, I noticed that it wasn't working. And I was like, oh, man, I just can't get my hand around like why I feel like I'm getting worse. Like my mental part of it, like I could just keep getting worse. The forgetting things or like losing track of time or doing all this sort of stuff was very much attached to like my perception of what Huntington's was. And so I would do some research and once I started, and so I was just getting super, super depressed about it because I felt like I was doing the best I can.
Yeah.
And so I kept going down the route of just being really spiritual, right? And just being like looking at things and seeing how they connect and really understanding that there is a higher functionality to people. And also like I always feel like if you have an unattainable goal, you'll have like infinite drive to get to that goal. And I mean, I've watched a lot, probably too much anime. And so I feel like there's like this thing, I was like, no, I can be like, I always say the Hokage because Naruto, but the depth of like people's like power is pretty crazy, but it's only lasts as long as you're alive, right?
Yeah.
Real impact and real connection is something like religion, right? So these religions that I've been reading about are thousands of years old. In the Bible, Abraham is guaranteed the multitudes by God. And so he got, that's true. All he had to do was almost kill his kid. Crazy. I don't know about that.
Wild times.
I don't know about that. You couldn't get me to do it. But then I wouldn't get it. But the point is that, so I looked at these things and I was like, okay, so there's a reason that these sustain, right? And it's because they want to get us these building blocks to understand things like death, right? They don't want you to be afraid. They want you to be able to understand that life has a purpose. And this is your purpose. And it's okay to fulfill your purpose and find it. And so as I like continue to just grow out of and just become mature, right? And just look at the world. And I was like, so really life is humans are, I always felt like humans are doing too much. Right. And I couldn't figure out like why I felt that way. And then I really started, like I said, I started to build these ideas of like pre-man. And I was like, well, if you look at Adam, he was just meant to observe, right? What he really did was do more than he was supposed to. And he ate, he ate of the fruit. He was just there to live and be with the animals. And that was his job. But he reached for more than his job. And that's the sin. And I was like, well, what is that? What does that mean? So I was like, okay, so get off your pride horse. Like the world is more than you can control in one thing.
Yeah.
But there are ways to influence a lot of people. You just have to have a strong faith. And so like I started building this strong faith and just being like, it's okay because no matter what, I'm going to pass. So I can just build this strong faith. I have time for that. And, you know, I got to a place where, and I read this book. It's called The Tibetan Book of Living and Dying.
Yeah, that's on my list. One of my next reads.
It's great. It's great. But it's because in Tibet, they have a very unique and very different culture around death. And they really take it as a rite of passage.
Yeah.
And they'll like
much more vocal about it.
Much more in depth and much more like evidential. So they would talk about how people, you know, in Tibet, they'd have like the monks who would be able to just like die.
Yeah.
Their body would sit there upright for 3 or 4 days. And then it would finally like be gone. And I was like, oh, God, that's cool. And so I started to really feel this sense of peace, and it was feeling great, but I was still hella depressed because, you know, declination, it sucks. It sucks. It's like the fear is just like with your fear of death. It's like the fear of it is way worse than the actual part of it.
Yeah.
But what I started, you know, I luckily have been going to therapy and doing that sort of, and that's what kind of frustrated me the most was I was like in therapy, I was doing this stuff. I was like, why can't I fucking slow my mind down?
Yeah.
And then what I figured out, I finally went to a neurologist and got like an actual physical checkup instead of just like
WebMD.
Yeah. Anxiety MD. And I got a really clean bill of health. Like they were like, you're better off, like you're better than you should be. And so after that, I was just like, wait a minute, holy shit. You mean like all the stuff that I've been doing is actually working? They're like, yeah. We actually think you might have ADHD.
That's when you said some of the things earlier about like losing track of time and all that. I was like, this sounds like ADHD.
Yeah. But I, you know, like as a black kid and growing up, that's not anything that you're going to get. Like they're not going to be like, oh, you're boisterousness or the fact you're the class clown, like that could be ADHD. They're not going to tell me that. So my mind went, oh, and so I, you know, hyper fixated on the ADHD, right? I got all the information and I was like, holy fucking balls, dude. Like I've just had ADHD the whole time. Oh my God. And so it took me like a couple months because my whole personality was surrounded by this Huntington's disease and the fact that I was going to die. Yeah. You know, and I was like, the relief I felt was insane.
Oh, I'm sure.
But also heavy level depression still. Cause I was like, fuck, what did I do with my life? I could have been doing this. I could have been doing that. And you try to like keep yourself from overthinking.
I'm sure with the like sped up timeline in your head. Yeah. It gets you, well, I've got to be super efficient. I've got to be on top of all this stuff because my time's limited.
Yeah. And you get crazy about it. Like,
I'm sure
if I didn't have like myself, like with my book, right? If I didn't write I wrote every day. Even if it was just a paragraph, I would write. Sometimes it'd be 10 pages. Sometimes it was a paragraph. Yeah. I wrote every day. I drew every day. I worked out every day. I did it every single day for 8 years, 9 years. And I was like, oh my God, what a release. Yeah. I don't have to do it every day. Fuck, thank God. And so I had to like figure, you know, kind of juggle some things. And now I feel, you know, this was about a year and a half ago. So now I feel pretty good. Yeah. Right? Feeling like, all right, you know what? To be honest, I was still fucking efficient. And now there's not the pressure of having to be efficient, but I can still be efficient. And yeah. I like that. It's a good feeling. But I still have all of this faith and like peace about just the belief that, you know, all of these things are still very true. And religion, and I think these days people need and it sucks to say the word religion because it's almost like the C word, but we do, right? So we've really created this pseudo spirituality, this pseudo religion around like astrology, you know, like, oh, I'm a Pisces or I'm a Libra or I'm a Aries. And so my, you know, this and this. And it's like, those are all really great things, but we want more. We want more. That doesn't actually give us a purpose in our life. That doesn't actually give us a reason to like look at death and be like, I have a reason to do something as far along as I can before the end. Yeah. Because the end is real. And it's not anything that we actually talk about in America. Nobody ever talks about that there is an end.
Yeah. Yeah. It's avoided a lot.
A lot.
And I think that's where a lot of my anxiety has come from is I have these feelings that there's no way to express them. There's no communication around it. And so that's kind of where this all came from.
Right. And people will be like, well, it's death is scary. You don't want to go to hell. And you're like, oh, come on. That's super basic.
Or you want to talk about death, man, that's super depressing.
Right.
And I think that's the harder thing. And I think, with what you're talking about too, is it makes you think about life differently when you know that there is an end.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily make me, there's days where it does make me more depressed and freaked out and anxious, but it also has given me this peace in the sense of living more fully each day.
Yeah. Yeah. And it does. Like you look outside and you're like, man, the lighting is great today. You know? And like I said, and my spirituality really, really grew to the point, like I really do feel like the world speaks to me. Right.
Yeah.
And some people would say God speaks to me, however you want to believe it, the universe. I get the message all the time. And that's how I feel. And I understand that those feelings are something that has been received in the past, right? And and it just helps you navigate the space of this existence. And you're like, oh man, because this is going to be hard. Or like the fear of global warming and the fear of all this stuff around us is a cycle that happens eternally.
Yeah.
Like somebody is always thinking the world is ending. And there's another set of people who are like, you're crazy for thinking that. But they could be right.
Yeah.
And to me, I'm like, all of those people have accurate beliefs, right? And I think that's where, like I said, this is where my idea of kind of religion and faith really centers itself, is I want to be able to see people create an ability to allow others to live, right? That's the problem I just see. Like it went from wanting to tell everybody what to do as a despot to wanting to not at all and just let everybody just do their thing because it's experiential.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of misery comes from. It's like you're not doing what you want to do. You're doing what you have to do.
Yeah.
And, as long as you understand there are consequences to the actions that you have or you make, I feel like everybody should do what they want to do.
Yeah. You've kind of danced around it a couple of times. So I think I'm super curious now, what do you think happens when we die?
I'm a pretty firm believer in the immortal soul and reincarnation. I believe it's more, I guess I'll have to describe it more as a series of events in the same sort of way where it was, because it's a growth process where where I started, my idea was here. And I really always I would say my first existential idea besides like heaven and hell was like the simulation.
Yeah.
That we're in a simulation. And if I'm being honest, I think the idea of this being a simulation still rings the most true to me, but it doesn't mean that it's not real and it's not meant to do something for us.
Yeah.
I think that because of my readings of other religions, there's always a goal of like leaving this plane behind and finding our truest self.
Yeah.
And so I think that is what this is this is a simulation, samsara, of misery. And you have to recognize that there is misery in all regards, but you have to be able to take yourself out of it and leave it behind.
Yeah.
And be like, no, this isn't, like, I'm not going to engage because this is wrong, but it's also, I'm going to elevate myself because this is how it is. Like, I'm going to take it in, but I'm not going to try to change anything. That's the hardest part.
Yeah.
Could you imagine trying to not tell someone that they're banging their head against the wall?
No.
But yeah, it's so hard. It's such a simple act. And you're like, all right, no, I got to let that person do that.
Yeah.
And so I think to me, it feels like this is a simulation in that way. And, I've taken psychedelics. You're great. They're so much fun. But you feel like there are a lot of, when you see the spectrum of like your maybe it's just your imagination, maybe it's real. But when you see that, you're like, dang, that could all be real. All these different planes, it feels like you're like, all right, this space that I'm in, the present is eternal. I always think of the Matthew McConaughey, like, time is a circle.
Time is a flat circle. Yeah.
And it really, especially the present. And so if I can be here and there and everywhere all at once, all the time, then I believe that. I think, and so to me, it's immortal. And this is my vessel and this is my experience because this is who I am right now. But once I die, this is done. And I have felt death, right, of my other closer variations, right? I always liken it to Rick and Morty. So he's got all those Ricks. And so there's all these Ricks die. But the main, Rick C-137, I think, is the one. He's the main Rick. And then there's like one other two Ricks. But, there's like, so
there's always another Rick.
There is. And so there's always another me. And it's closer each time, like something may happen or whatever. You have a near-death experience or you have this thing and you're like, you feel it. And you feel like, dang, that was the end for me. So, but it was. Your one version of you died. Because everything is possible, right? So you take a left or you take a right. That thing falls on you. That thing doesn't fall on you.
Yeah.
There was a shooting at Con. There were bullet holes but it was after we were closed. 3 hours earlier, it could have fucking killed somebody.
Yeah.
So those sorts of things happen all the time. And I think that that's accurate. Like I said, it's the simulation. It's giving us the experience because empathy is required for you to be able to take somebody else and let them be. Right. And so the more you learn and the more you feel and the more you experience, the better you are at that empathy.
You feel it all.
Bro, I thought I was dying. I'm not going to say I wouldn't fully guru, but it's like I would just sit and think. And that ADHD brain can really just think.
It can go some places.
It can go some places. And you just look and you're like, this connections and these are, and like I said, I would get feedback in ways that are subtle that felt like, yeah, this is a reaffirmation of those ideas. But it also feels, I don't think I'm right. I think I'm right for myself.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's all you need to be.
Exactly.
Right. I think that's ultimately, I always talk about this project. I always think of it as like, I'm almost crowdsourcing.
Yeah.
I'm crowdsourcing opinions across the board and trying to figure out what resonates with me. Like my belief is, fade to black, game over. Which I think is why it freaks me out. And I have, through readings, through meditation, through conversations with people, I think my feelings are changing, or at least my acceptance is changing, which is all we can ask for. But I think at the end of the day, we have to be okay with what we believe, whatever it is, because we're going to go through with it. And if we can find something that gives us peace, I think that makes that process and the whole process of life before easier.
Yeah. And I agree. And that's, like when you have a lot of knowledge, you tend to make a little bit more thoughtful opinions. Yeah. And it's always felt really crazy because I went through such a selfish stage because obviously fear creates a lot of selfishness.
Yeah.
But that's where I got to too. I was like, man, nobody knows.
Yeah.
Nobody knows.
Yeah.
You can't tell, nobody knows. Nobody's ever known. Nobody's ever been able to write it down. There's a lot of anecdotes.
Yep.
There's a lot of stories.
Yep.
There's a lot of stuff, but nobody knows for sure.
Yeah. You'll know when you know.
You'll know when you see it.
But
you're like, shit.
That's it. Or sweet, or whatever.
Or sweet.
Yeah,
or maybe you just go right into the next one.
Yeah. Maybe it'll be just a sad trombone sound. And it's like, and you're done. And game over reads on the screen.
Yeah. Well, and I think there are moments where, I've had like past life experiences I felt like really happened and resonated with me. I always try to tell people to be honest with themselves about stuff like that. Like if you really feel it, go with it.
Yeah.
Just go with it. Don't doubt it. You are your experience. Nobody knows better than you what you feel.
What would you want to tell the people that you were leaving behind if you were to die tomorrow?
Oh man, that's tough. And I looked at that one a bunch too. I don't even. I think I would have to say I'll be there. I'll be there like I wasn't before, for sure.
Yeah.
Because like I said, fear makes you really selfish. And I had to go off and do my own thing. And I wasn't there for a lot of stuff. I feel like I could have been.
Yeah. I mean, you were processing a lot. And again, when we talked a couple weeks ago, I think the way that you described it to me is like, you have a limited timeline.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say that that's like a nice thing. Obviously not.
It's good to know that you have an end.
And I think that's
the general area.
It changes your perspective on, I've got to do this now because I don't know. And I mean, I think that's what a lot of people get caught up in is they don't think about there's that door or whatever you want to call it, that it's coming. And I think, not that I would ever wish on anybody to have, to know for sure or have an idea, because that's usually not a good sign. But then
Yeah.
and I've got to go get stuff done. So that's what you're doing. I've got to run down all these things. One, your ADHD mind was also pushing that too.
Yeah.
But you're running down all these paths because I got to do it now.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't do it now,
Full sprint.
win. Yeah. Yeah. Full sprint of a marathon.
Bam. I'm running everything. Full sprint.
Yeah. And I mean, it's understandable.
Yeah. It's been good though. Like I said, I am grateful. I'm grateful. Like it is, people who understand getting bad news up front and just like living your life with that, understand that like that choice was the right choice.
Yeah.
Like I would not have, like, just like you said, I would have been much slower. I would have been much less likely to like do the things I need to do. But I also sometimes think that there is a level of like, because I didn't have the fear, if I wouldn't have had the fear, maybe I would have just like gone after money and made some money and worked hard and just picked like that career path and been like, da, 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 da. Who knows?
Yeah. I think that's a place that I'm in right now of like, I mean, that's a whole other side anxiety of me, but like, I think the hard thing with that path is that's a path that we're told of, go get the career, go make the money, and then retire and have 10, 15 years to enjoy. But if you have a diagnosis that you might not make it to 65 to retire, then like that path doesn't really work, right?
Not at all. Not at all.
I wouldn't want, if I knew I was on a limited time frame, I wouldn't want to
save and worry about your credit score and everything else.
It's like,
tell me about it.
Yeah, let me put this in my 401k or whatever, like I would, do all those things now, that's what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, like I said, it worked out so far. My health is really good.
Yeah.
I'm better health than all my friends. So that feels good.
See how that going for you?
I got that, and it's nice to be, it's also nice to know that I put the work in to keep myself healthy, to keep myself like on the side or the longer side of that like longevity coin. It's worth it. And it's nice. Like I said, growing is the hardest in the beginning. And now I'm going to just, all right, let me sprout. I've sprouted. I've gotten through that stage. Somebody else died over there. Now opened up the light a little bit.
Yeah. Every day.
Every day, man. Yeah. And it's fun. It's fine because you just get more. I think having a good relationship with that just makes you more confident about stuff.
Yeah.
You're like, no, I'll be okay. If I spend 2 years here, it'll be all right. Because it wasn't before, I was counting like 7 years. My mom was 47. I'm 38. 9 years. Holy shit. I was freaking out.
Yeah.
I was freaking out.
There's a countdown.
It was just
a clock.
Now it was just the decline,
Yeah. Yeah, that's true too. Is like when it really starts to hit.
And it's like, and it's something that unless you see somebody with it, like that, I think that's also the hard part.
Oh,
right?
I'm sure.
Is like
knowing.
Like my mom at the end she was only 90 pounds, very, very sick.
Yeah.
Yeah. It sucks, man. It's the worst.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming in and sharing, and
thanks for having me. Thanks for letting me talk about it.
Yeah.
Obviously you can tell I have had a lot of thoughts
and we'll continue to have a lot of thoughts.
Oh yeah. Maybe less, a little. No.
They're going to keep going. They're going to keep going. But yeah, I appreciate you coming in and sharing all that. And maybe you can, I know you mentioned a little bit your book that you've been working on and trying to get it published.
Oh,
and
yeah.
You want to share anything else?
Oh, yeah.
Parting thoughts or anything?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And you said you have a little poem you want to share.
Yeah. I'm going to read this little poem.
Is this something you wrote?
It's something I wrote. It's pretty fun. This poem is called Snail Mail. What if we put our mail on a snail, watched it travel the earth, and go about gathering the sense of adventure? What if we let time stretch our words into precious things, savored the unique shape of their letters, and fell into an old love? Why slow love brought on a snail? Joyful imagination is a repast, forever fresh, sweetened by the heart and aged to perfection. A slime coats the long messenger, Marsh's murk, the story of its trail. Beloved, we yearn, beg for clues to your emotions. Snail, please, return and share our love. Bring the sound of rain-soaked laughter. Whisper like tall grass. Call them beautiful as silent snow. Will more adventure and more time add divinity to our precious mail? Strengthen word and bond? Or will long days separate us forever?
That's awesome. Thank you.
That is a precursor to what you can expect from my new book called The Great King's Tale.
Coming out someday soon.
Someday.
Yeah. And we'll make sure
Sooner rather than later.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Zach.
Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of When We Die Talks. I hope today's conversation sparked some thoughts and helped you feel a little more at ease with the idea of death. Remember, this journey is all about exploring our beliefs and fears together, so I'd love to hear from you. Call our voicemail at 971-328-0864 and share what you think happens when we die. Your thoughts might just be featured on a future episode and could help others on their own journey. Until next time, have a good life.